So I think we're ready to get started, and thank you all for sharing your lunch hour with us. I'm really impressed that you've all turned out. It's getting late in the conference. You're probably running low on energy to take in yet more technical content, but I'm delighted that you've turned out to come and see our little show here. We're going to be talking about building data-centric applications in WPF using the new DataGrid and ribbon controls. So just give you a little introduction about us. This is my colleague Samantha Durante, who's a program manager on the WPF framework team. She's responsible for the ribbon and DataGrid controls you're going to be seeing today. That's her email address right there. And my name's Mark Wilson-Thomas. I'm a program manager on the CIDR team, which is the team that ships the WPF and Silverlight Designer in Visual Studio. That's a bit of a mouthful, but CIDR sounds easier, so you can say that too. I'm responsible for the layout features in CIDR, as well as for looking after some of our community feedback. And for both of us, we're really keen that any feedback that you have after today's show, that you just drop us an email. We would love to hear from you about the concepts that we're discussing today and the ideas. We want to hear how they fit in with the kind of applications that you're building. So today's talk is really about building data-centric line of business applications. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean by that the kind of applications where you're essentially doing update operations on a database and flowing data back and forth, redisplaying it, putting it up in forms that maybe make it more easy to digest for the users inside maybe your enterprise or whatever business it is you happen to be working in. So I'd just like to take a little bit of a show of hands. How many of you out there are building those kinds of data-centric line of business applications already? That is just awesome. That's got to be a good 2/3 of the room. And they're all shipping today. I mean, any of you just planning to build that kind of application? Another show of hands? So that's probably the rest of you, I think. This is very good to hear. And out of all of those guys out there, how many of you are previous Windows Forms users? Yeah, about half the room. Yeah, that's also no big surprise, I guess. So that's really good to hear. We're finding that WPF is increasingly catching momentum amongst this kind of application, and the reasons why will hopefully become more apparent as we go through. So today's session, what to expect. We want to give you a view on what it takes to build line of business applications in WPF, and hopefully to see how in the future it will become an easier proposition. We want to give you a full walkthrough of using the new ribbon and DataGrid controls in action and just see how you can take them away and get going right now. In fact, just one final show of hands. Go on, indulge me. Who's downloaded the ribbon and DataGrid already? So we looked at the numbers. There's quite a few. We have 2,300 downloads already on the stuff that was released only yesterday, as I understand it. So that's really great to hear. So you'll also see how wiring up your application to data, whether that's data in a collection of objects or it's data in a database in the traditional sense, will be a whole lot easier in Visual Studio 2010. And the good news for those of you who've been PowerPointed out already is that most of this will be done in demos, not much of it will be slideware. But always gets a clap, right? So the good news also for those of you watching along on the video is that we're going to use the slides as kind of a pause point to help you find your way around later. So the first thing I'm going to do is introduce you to the application that we're going to be working with today. So this is the finished product, and we'll be building up to this. This application is a real estate application. So I really want to apologize for the subject matter. It's really not a great time to be talking about real estate in today's economy, but the demo was kind of cut before all this started to get ugly. Anyhow, the application is the kind of app you can imagine might be used in a front office in a estate agency to keep track of the listings that they have on place and all the different features, maybe helping clients to find a property when they come in, also to keep things up to date. And to get details on the people who viewed that property. And you'll be seeing all of those features as we go through. But just to give you a quick overview, just to see how you can see some of the top-level features, notice that at the top of the application there's a ribbon control. And just as I resize this application, I want you to watch carefully what happens up there at the top of the application. So you can see that as I compress the application, the ribbon automatically reorganizes itself into forms that can be still used, even though I'm at that smaller resolution. And you'll be seeing how to build that feature using the new ribbon control. So ribbons got a bunch of other features too. So you'll see also that we have quick access toolbars and fancy support for the Perl object, which is the start menu in the top left-hand corner for Office applications. All of that is all part of the ribbon control. Now down to the DataGrid. This is the new DataGrid. As you can see, it's not the regular Battleship Grey that you might expect of an out-of-the-box DataGrid. Even out of the box, it looks pretty good, and you'll see how that builds up. But obviously, it's been heavily restyled as well. So you can see also that we have a selected item template here, which actually lets us get more information into the row. And you'll see as I pass over some of the items, they actually have pictures associated with them. It's also user reorderable, so I can swap columns around to my heart's content. If I'm feeling a little hard up, I can sort the other way around, so that I can find those cheaper properties that I'm looking for. So you can see it's a pretty full-featured data grid, and there actually are a bunch more features that we'll go through as we pass along. But you can see here in the date column, we also have a date picker control, which is actually part of the toolkit package that we'll be talking about too. So without further ado, I want to hand over to Samantha, who's going to give you this walkthrough about how to build this application for real. Samantha.
Thanks, Mark. So the application that Mark just showed you may look like it's fairly complicated to build, but our goal over the next hour is to show you that it's actually pretty simple to put this together using our new controls and the improvements to our tooling. I also want to give you a basic introduction to all of the most popular features of our DataGrid and ribbon controls so that you can go home tonight, download the bits, and actually try them out yourself. Okay, so we're going to get started here with a blank application. What we've done is I've just defined a namespace for the DataGrid using the WPF toolkit, and for the ribbon using the ribbon controls library. I've also defined some resources in our window, which we'll use a little bit later, and just built the basic skeleton of an app with space for our DataGrid and ribbon controls. You'll see in a bit, we've also wired up a data source in the background. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just add our DataGrid control. Here in our DG namespace, we've got our DataGrid. I'm going to stick this in the second row, and then I'm just going to drag on quickly our item source. Okay, well, we're missing some stuff. That's okay. Here I'm going to set my item source to be bound to a static resource, which we've defined in our window resources. And this is called the Southridge data. Now, if we compile and run this, oh no. Oh, thank you very much, IntelliSense. All right. Oh, God. Oh, thank you. I had this all stuck in the toolbox before. All right, there we go. Thank you very much. Okay, so you'll see what we've got here with just one line of code. We were able to generate a fully functioning data grid. So what's going on is that our auto generation feature has actually gone through the data source and created a column for each field in our data, which has been mapped to one of our stock column types. And you'll see out of the box here, we've got some great end user features that are pretty basic. We've got end user row and column resizing. You can also reorder columns, as Mark showed you in the other demo. We've got selection here in a couple different modes. Right now, we're in a full extended mode, full row extended. We can also edit the data, and the whole thing is fully keyboard navigatable. And as Mark mentioned before, we also have some sorting. So auto generation is really great for when you're just looking to get up and running very quickly. But the majority of real-world applications will probably need a little bit more control over your columns collection. So I'm just going to pop into the designer here and show you how we can modify our columns collection using some tools in the designer. You'll see that our data is being displayed, which is really helpful. And I'm just going to pull up the context menu, and under the data grid item, I'm going to choose to add and edit columns. You'll see on the left here that we have defined a bunch of columns, or all the different fields in our database, and I can choose which of these I'd like to add to my columns collection. So here I'm going to add the title, and then maybe just a couple more. You can see you can also choose to add each data field and map it to one of our stock column types here. Clicking on the edit button will bring up some really basic column properties that you might want to change. You've got your header, things like can the user reorder, resize, and sort, whether it's read-only or visible. And something which is, you might want to try out is our variety of auto width settings. So right now this one's set to auto, but I can change this to be set to the size of the header, which means that it will always be the size of the header regardless how wide the cells are. If I wanted to set it to size automatically to the size of the widest cell, I can set this one to size of cells. And if we want to fill all the remaining space in the data grid, we can simply just set this star. Now if we pop back into the design view here, you'll see that our columns have been displayed using the properties we just set. So looking at our data columns, you can see everything's been serialized at the XAML here, and the designers actually also turned off auto-generate columns, which is on by default. So we have 4 different stock column types, which you could use: checkbox column, combo box column, text column, and a hyperlink column. But if you need something different, we've added as a convenience something called the DataGrid template column. So the template column basically allows you to set any WPF control as your cell template. So here I'm going to go ahead and actually create a custom date column to display the date for our appointment to go see this listing. Okay, so here in the DataGrid templates cell template, I'm going to define a data template. And in our data template, I'm going to stick our new data grid control, which is also in the WPF toolkit. Here I'm binding our selected date to the appointment date property of our in our data source. Okay, so if we run this now, we'll see we've just created in those simple steps a date column. Okay, you can see over here is our date column, and this is fully editable using either the calendar control, or you can just type right into the box. And if you had used a control which does not have a built-in editing template, we also allow you to define a cell editing template. So for example, if you wanted to put a button in this column, but you still wanted the user to be able to edit it, you can set a text block or some other editable control as the cell editing template. Okay, so those are the basic things that you need to know to get up and running with your data grid. So let's just recap really quickly what we went over. Okay, so the data grid has a lot of great features right out of the box. Our auto-generate columns feature allows you to generate a fully functioning data grid in just one line of code, and this will include features like resizing, reordering, sorting, editing, etc. We have 4 different stock column types you could use, or you can define your own using the DataGrid template column. So you can download the DataGrid and the date picker controls today in the WPF toolkit. This is available at codeplex.com/WPF. And later, these controls will also be wrapped back into our framework in .NET 4.0. Okay, switching back now to go over our ribbon. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the ribbon control from Office, but I just want to do a quick overview to make sure you're familiar with all the different features that we have in the ribbon. So you can see here we've got all of the controls being organized into tabs and groups. We've got over here the Pearl button, which is officially called the application menu, and this includes a bunch of high-level actions you might want to do to your documents, the list of recent documents, and also some sub-menus. And then here we also have the quick access toolbar, which allows you to allows the end user to add new controls to their quick access, either using this menu, or you can also use the context menu to add it. And as Mark showed before, the ribbon also has this dynamic resizing, which allows you to display as many controls as is possible, no matter what size the window is. All right, so one thing that's interesting about Ribbon is that unlike most UI development, which is view-centric, Ribbon is more view model-centric. Basically, the ribbon holds a bunch of actions or commands, and each of these has a set of UI associated with it, such as labels and icons. So we like to call this an intent-driven paradigm. And you'll find these actions are used in multiple places throughout the ribbon. So the way that we've designed to accommodate this in the WPF ribbon is called a ribbon command. So this basically just takes your standard WPF command and then associates with it a bunch of different properties you could use to associate UI with this particular command. So here we've got things like a label title and description, small and large image sources to represent the control or the group when it's collapsed, and also some tooltip properties. And all of these properties basically allow us to auto-generate for you most of the UI that goes into the ribbon and helps to really keep your ribbon XAML nice and clean. Okay, so let's go ahead and start adding a ribbon control. Here in my R namespace, I'll add the ribbon. And to the ribbon, we are going to add ribbon tab. And I'll label this the home tab. And within our tab, we're going to go ahead and add a group. We'll name this group 1. So ribbon commands will basically be the heart of your application. And you're basically going to want to define a ribbon command and then assign it to every control in every group which you have in your ribbon. So first, I'm going to define a really quick ribbon command for our group. And we're only going to put the properties on it which we need to get the group to display properly. So ribbon command, and I'm going to add a small image source. And we're also going to add a label title. And we'll call this the price group. Now, if we go ahead, we can add a few controls to our group. So you can see we've taken a bunch of our standard WPF controls and wrapped them in an interface which allows them to be used in the ribbon. So here I'm just going to add a ribbon button. And the only thing I need to set on this button is the command, which I've defined earlier in our resources. And we'll just add one more button here with a different command assigned to it. Okay. So if we run this, you'll see that we've now added a ribbon to our application, a really simple one. It just has one group with a couple of controls in it. And here's our ribbon. You can see that the UI is being generated just from the properties we've set in the commands. So one thing you might notice is missing here is the integration with the title bar in the non-client area, which you'll see in the Office ribbon. So usually the Perl button would be up in this corner and the QAT would be drawn over the title bar. So in the process of building the ribbon, we discovered that it was actually fairly non-trivial to write the interop code, which you need to do in order to get that. So what we've done to make it easier is actually created a new root element called the ribbon window, which will do all of that work for you. So I'm going to go ahead here and in my XAML, just change this to be a ribbon window. And we're also going to need to do the same thing in our code behind. Okay, so if we run this again, you'll see that the ribbon has now shifted up and is actually integrating with our title bar area. So that's something that's pretty simple that you can do. And the ribbon doesn't have to be used in the ribbon window. You could also use it in a standard window or in a page if you prefer to use the ribbon in a browser. All right, so now that we've got the basic ribbon structure down, I want to talk a little bit about how you can customize that resizing behavior. So I'm just going to go ahead. I think I've lost my stuff here, so I'm just going to create a couple groups really quickly. Group 2, I'm just going to add a few more controls here. And make a third group. Okay, so let's take a look at what our standard resizing behavior is. Resizing in the ribbon is handled by the ribbon wrap panel, which is the items panel for each of our groups. So the way the ribbon wrap panel works is it has a bunch of predefined templates, which basically tell the controls how to lay out, and this is depending on how many controls you have in your group. So the groups will collapse in a cyclical order from right to left by default. So you'll see, as I make this smaller, the rightmost group collapses first to its first predefined template, then the next one, and so on, until the ribbon finally gets small enough that it actually disappears. And you can see when groups collapse here, we automatically do this pop-up, which displays the largest template. So there's a couple of different ways to customize this resizing behavior. The simplest is to use ribbon size definitions. So ribbon size definitions are basically a way for you to tell the ribbon wrap panel how you want your controls to lay out without having to write any layout code. So we're going to go ahead really quickly and define some ribbon size definitions on our group. Group size definitions. Since we're going to have more than one, we're going to add a collection of ribbon group size definitions. And now I'm going to go ahead and add our first size definition. So this basically, each size definition represents one layout of the group that you'd like to use. And each size definition should include a ribbon control size definition for each of the controls in the group. So there's 4 controls in this group. And I'm going to go ahead and define 4 control size definitions. The control size definitions determine the size of the control by setting the visibility of the label and the size of the image. So you see in the ribbon, a large image has a visible label and a large image. A medium control has a small image and a visible label, and a small control has just an icon and no label visible. So I'm going to set this so that this control is going to have the first button is going to be large. So image size large, label is visible. The next 2 are going to be medium. So this has a small image and a visible label. And the last one's going to be small with a small image and no visible label. And then we can go ahead and define a second group size definition where it collapses to large, small, small, small. So I'm just going to turn off these labels here. And finally, we're going to give it a final group size definition which represents the collapsed mode. We're going to set is collapsed equals true. So that will, setting those properties will actually define our own custom layout template. And it was pretty simple to do. Another area of resizing you might want to customize is the order in which the groups collapse. So as I said before, they'll collapse by default cyclically from right to left. And if you prefer them to collapse in a different order, say from left to right, you can just go ahead and define that on the ribbon tabs using the group size reduction order. And you just name each of the tabs, each of the groups by their name. So I want my leftmost groups to collapse first, so I'm going to say group 1. Then I'm going to have our second group collapse twice in a row, and then go on to our group 3. So if we run this now, we can take a look at the behavior we've defined. So you can see now this is starting in a different template than the old one. And as I resize, my leftmost group collapses first, and the center goes twice, and then our right group. Okay, so that's about it for the ribbon basics that you need to know to get a ribbon up and running. So let's recap quickly what we talked about. Okay, so the first thing you need to know about ribbon is that ribbon commands are going to be the heart of your control. You're going to want to define a ribbon command for each control and each group in your ribbon. If you want the title bar integration, the simplest way to do that is by using our ribbon window control. And you can customize your resizing behavior without having to write any layout code by using group size definitions and group size reduction order. So you can download Ribbon today. There's a preview available on the Office UI licensing site. That's the address up there. And in order to access the point where you download the ribbon, you actually just have to sign the Office license by clicking on License the Office UI, fill out the form. It only takes a minute, and the license is completely free. And then it'll bring you to the page where you can actually choose to download the zip file, which includes the sources and binaries. Okay. What was that?
Standard images on the ribbon?
No, we do not have an image library. You have to define, for now, you have to define either your own images or some drawings to stick in there. Okay, so moving on, I'd like to show you now the second stage of our application, which has these two controls that have just been fleshed out a little bit more and explain to you some of the more advanced features that you're probably going to want to use. Okay, so let's take a look at our Stage 2 app. You can see it hasn't changed too much. We've pretty much just added a bunch of more controls to our ribbon and defined some more custom things in our data grid. So first thing you might notice in DataGrid is we've got a few more template columns. Here we've made a button column, an image column, a ratings column with this neat little ratings control. And as I scroll through the different rows, you'll see that there's a feature in there called row details, which is basically expanding our row to show additional information which is associated with that data item. So in this example, we've just done something really simple, just did one text box, which is bound to one of our data fields, which has a long description, and then had a little more button, which just pops up an additional details view. And Mark will show you a little bit later how to actually define a details view like this using Visual Studio Designer. So the way this is done, I'm going to pop up here my document outline and jump down to my data grid. So row details are defined. There's a data template, and there's a row details template property on the data grid. And in it here, I've just defined a simple data template, which has a stack panel with a text box and that button. So you can imagine that you might want to put in a form here, or if you have a data source with many fields and you don't want the user to have to scroll horizontally, you can kind of stick them all in this additional area, which shows more information. We also, in order to control the visibility, you can set the row details visibility mode. Right now I have it set to be visible only when that row is selected, but you can set it also to be visible all the time or to be hidden. Another feature that we have in our data grid, which is new, is the row level validation. So cell level validation has always been available using iData error info. But before we introduced binding groups in 3.5 SP1, you weren't able to actually validate cross fields. So the data grid takes advantage of the new binding groups feature and allows us to validate stuff across an entire row before it's submitted back to the database. So let me just show you the code really quickly. Here I have a date validation rule, which is defined in a separate class. And this rule basically checks that one date comes later than another. And I've assigned this here to our row validation rules collection, where you can put in as many validation rules as you need. And then here under the row validation error template, I've defined a control template which shows you what which lets you control what notification users should get. So by default, I think this looks like a red exclamation point that appears in the row header, but I've actually changed it here to look like a fancy red X with the tooltip, which explains what the error is. So if we try this out here, the rule has been defined so that the date updated for the listing has to come after the date that it was listed. So if I go ahead and change this, we'll see that our error donor now appears on the row header and tells me what the problem is. And I can go back and fix it, and the error will go away. The last thing I want to talk about in the data grid is some basic styling features that we have. So this looks, we've just applied some really basic things to this from our previous version, which has really improved the styling quite a bit. So here we've applied an alternating row background, and we've also gotten rid of the grid lines. And these are done through simple properties right on the data grid itself. We also have lots of styling properties so you can set specific styles on cells or rows, and also on the row and column headers. Okay, so let's look at the ribbon a little bit more now. So as you can see, we've added a whole bunch of more controls to this ribbon, and also further defined some custom resizing behavior. Here we've got our application menu, which shows our logo as an icon. And again, we've used the the application commands, or the ribbon commands, to define what this should look like. And in the application menu, we have our recent list, which shows the other client profiles we've been working on. And we've got our submenu showing some other options for using with this app. So I'm going to jump into the ribbon and show you the code for this. Here in the application menu, we've got our command defined, which helps us to auto-generate that UI for the icon and for the tooltip. And then here in the recent items list, we've added a ribbon highlighting list, which includes a list of our most recent files. And if a recent documents list doesn't really fit in your application, you could also stick anything else in there, which is more appropriate. Underneath, we've got ribbon application menu items and split menu items. And just like the other controls in the ribbon, these just have a command assigned to it. And again, that helps us to generate our UI. And you can see here that the UI is being kind of smart. Only the items which have children actually get the template which shows the little side arrow. So this will change automatically if you decide to add and remove things to your application menu. Another feature we've got here is the quick access toolbar. The quick access toolbar, we've hooked up some customization to it, which allows you to specify which controls you'd like to appear in this menu, and the end user can choose to add and remove them as they choose. We did not, in this example, hook up the context menu, but that would also be really simple to do. So the code for this can be found here under the quick access toolbar property. We've just added a bunch of ribbon controls and assigned commands to them. And then to specify where the control should show up, whether it's in the menu and checked, in the toolbar, we have this placement command, which allows you to set in the menu, in the toolbar, just in the menu, or just in the toolbar, depending on what's appropriate for this scenario. Another feature which is really popular in the Office ribbon are contextual tabs. And contextual tabs are really useful for hiding and displaying controls only in the situation where they make sense. So you can imagine in this app, for example, we might have a button which displays a map of where this listing is located. And on the map, you're going to want to have controls such as zooming in and zooming out to help the user navigate the map. However, it wouldn't make sense to have this tab with map controls available all the time because there's not always a map to use them on. So this is one situation where contextual tabs comes in really handy, and we can just make it appear and disappear depending when the correct context occurs. So the way we've hooked this up is through the contextual tab groups property. A contextual tab group can hold one or more ribbon tabs, which should be displayed at the same time in a certain context. So here we've just defined a normal ribbon tab, like we would anywhere else, and stuck it in our map contextual tab group. And then the code behind, I've just hooked up I've hooked into the button click events to activate and deactivate this tab as it's necessary. Well, just a few more things to talk about with ribbon. The resizing, as we showed before, can be customized using just without having to write any layout code. But if you needed something a little bit more complicated, for example, in Word, if you look at this font group, as we resize it, you'll actually see that some of the controls change their relative positions to others. For example, if you watch these two buttons, when we go to switch to the next template, they'll move down to the bottom. So if you needed to do something like that, you're actually able to define your own layout panel and just override the ribbon wrap panel by assigning it to the group's items panel. And the final thing I want to show you in ribbon is our skinning. So it's just a preview, so we don't have a ton of skinning APIs yet. But what we've done to make it really simple for you is to provide, out of the box, a ribbon Office 2007 skin and also the standard Win 7 theme. So right now, I've applied the resource dictionary, which includes the Office 2007 skin. And if I go ahead and comment this out, so it goes back to its standard Win 7 theme, we can run this again and see that we now have a Win 7 theme applied. So the look and feel of the ribbon has changed quite a bit. The application menu in Win 7 is no longer a pearl button, but it's actually in line with the tabs. And you can see some of the styling on the ribbons a little bit different. All right, so those are all the basics you need to know to get started with your DataGrid and ribbon and start writing your own apps. Just to quickly recap what we just talked about. So in DataGrid, we used row details to show additional fields within the grid, and you can put whatever is most appropriate for your application right in that data template. The row-level validation allowed us to do cross-field validation, and you can also use other mechanisms to do cell validation. And then finally, we customized the grid using some of our simple styling properties, and we also allow you to do retemplate and make it look as branded and custom as you can. With the ribbon, we include built-in skins for both Office 2007 and Windows 7. We have some smart UI in there which will generate the appropriate visuals for your app, including application menu items which switch templates depending on whether or not there's children, a quick access toolbar to help the end user customize their experience, and contextual tabs to hide and show controls as necessary. Finally, you have full control over the resizing layout of your ribbon, either by using our built-in APIs or by replacing the ribbon rack panel with your own layout panel. Okay, so now I'd like to pass on to Mark, who will show you how to use some of our new tools in Visual Studio to create a really simple master details.
So thank you, Samantha. I think you'll all agree that really you can get an awful lot done in a pretty short time with these new controls, and I hope you'll all be going away and getting productive with them pretty soon. But what I want to do now is to give you a bit of a sneak peek into the future. This is a build of Visual Studio 2010. It's actually later than the one that you have on your bits disks today. That's because there's not a great deal in the way of new WPF designer features present on the disk that you have, so don't go looking for them there. I'm sorry about that. But what I'm giving you here is hopefully going to whet your appetite for the time frame around Beta 1 next year, when we'll be ready to share these things more publicly. So you're getting to take a look at that. And the features that I want to show you here are around how we can get the data binding work that we need to do for our business app done in a way that doesn't require us to spend a whole lot of time completely understanding the full detail of the data binding syntax. So, I mean, some of you out there may dream in data binding syntax by now, I don't know, but I'm not quite there myself. So what I'm going to show you here is, you'll recall the details screen that Samantha showed in the application, and what I'm going to show you is how we can go ahead and build that, and I hope that I'll show you it without writing a single line of XAML. So what I'm going to do first is to open up this data sources window. Now, those of you who've been Windows Forms developers for a while have probably seen the data sources window before. It's not really any different from what you've seen in the past. Allows you to bind to various kinds of data sources, set up the connection style. And here I'm connecting to a local SQL database, but it could equally be any other kind of data source. Or not. I did tell you these were early bits, did I not? So I hope the demo gods will be with me in the next connection. Bear with me. See the pretty whale? So I'm first going to check the database that I'm going to use, make sure that it's working. There we go. So what's happening now is that it's reflecting over that database, just looking at the metadata that's in there, and it will come with a list. So, I feel better now, I hope you all do. I'm just going to select some fields from the database and a couple of other tables. And what's happening now is that under the hood, you can just see it behind the scenes here, generating a strongly typed data set. This is actually an XSD data set, but it could work with any number of other different kinds of data set that you might choose to use. At this point, this is one that happens to work rather well. And you can see over here in the data sources window that it's looked at the schema that we selected and chosen the fields. It's also aware of the fact that there's a foreign key relationship here between the listings view and the viewings, which are actually the viewings that have taken place on the property. So this will allow us to see who's been taking a look at these different properties, and we'll come back to that in a moment. So I'll just size my window up, and I'm just going to build. By the time you ship, you won't need to do this, but for now, to start, we need to build. And I'm going to choose a details view, because initially I'm going to show the details for the property that I'm going to work on. And the first action I'm going to take is drag and drop. And under the hood, what's happening now is that the tool is going away and working with the schema and figuring out what appropriate controls to match with the fields that we've got. And you'll see that it's been smart enough to hook up labels which actually correspond to the database field names, and in fact it's clever enough to have spotted that the camel-cased field names here need to have a space inserted into them as well. It's put us up text boxes for most of these fields, and for the most part that actually works quite well. But in this case, looking at the primary photo, I don't think it would be terribly interesting to our users to see the URL for the JPEG file that contains the picture of the property. I think the property picture itself might be more useful to them. So I'm just going to zoom out a little. I'm going to take hold of these two fields and take them out, because I'm going to need a little more room. You see the snapping is helping us to position things there. I'm going to get rid of this text box field, because it's not what I want. What I really want is an image. So I'm going to drag an image on. Now, of course, right now this image is just a blank image. So you can see here in the XAML, there's nothing going on. If we run this, nothing will happen. But the data sources window comes to the rescue again, because it lets us paint controls with a data binding. So that's pretty cool, and it's made a pretty decent guess here. It knows that it's likely to be the source property, because that's a likely text property that I might want to set on an image control. And it's gone ahead and put a primary photo in there. Now I'm dying to take a look at this thing, but there's one little step that we need to take first. So you see here in the window loaded collection, event rather, that's where the automatic binding code has been put. And I'm just going to put a little tweak in here that takes us to the first record in the collection. And now we're ready to roll. Here we go. So we have our first binding. Now, not a line of code in writing from me in sight, apart from that little tweak on the record. Now that's kind of good and interesting, and we've got a little bit of customization going on. But what we'd really like to do is have this view contain a little bit more detail. And you remember that I mentioned that we have an awareness of foreign key relationships here in the data sources window. What I'm going to do here is take the viewings, and I'm going to leave that in list view, which is where we get a list of the items returned. And I'm going to drop that on. And what this is going to give us is a master details binding. Okay? It's going to give us a master details binding for the selected property from the listings that happens to be present. Now, that's not going to be very interesting unless we can actually page through the properties. So I'm just going to do one little extra piece of customization. I'm going to drop myself a couple of buttons here. And one of these buttons is going to be the imaginatively titled forward button. And for that guy, I'm going to switch to the newly reinstated events tab. For those of you who haven't seen Visual Studio 2008 SP1, this has been back since then. And I've actually got a couple of pre-canned event handlers in here to save me torturing you by writing them in front of you. Now I'm going to switch to my second button. In this case, I'm just going to use the XAML and write back here. So I'm just going to stay in the click handler drop down and select back for my handler. And now we fire up again, we can see our new UI. I mean, a bit slappy there. I didn't really line those things up. I'll sort that out later. But you can see that I can go forward through the collection. And unfortunately, this being a tough market, not many viewings going on. But when we get to this one, we'll find there's another. Times are slim pickings. But you can see that that's a fully wired up master details view. And I didn't have to write any XAML at all to get that done. Didn't have to learn any data binding syntax. But I'm not quite satisfied. I'm just an inveterate tweaker. I like to have my apps look just the way I want them, and clearly that's not an app you could ship. But what I'm trying to get to here is that you can understand that you can get to customizations. So you're about to see a feature that nobody outside of Microsoft has seen before. I'm going to dive into the data template for the third column in my viewings. And that happens to be a column that looks at proceeding, whether the client is proceeding with this particular property, whether they're really interested. Now, that's one that I'm really interested in, but I had a really boring checkbox there before, and, you know, checkboxes, so 1990s, right? So, going to get rid of that checkbox and have something a little bit more visual. What I really want is a kind of traffic light. So what I'm going to do is going to go ahead and add a rectangle. So far, so good. I have my rectangle. I select my rectangle, and you'll notice that when I select in the XAML, I get synchronized selection here in the property inspector. This turns out to be very useful, because now what I'm going to do is configure that rectangle. And what I really want to do, it'd be good if I went to the properties sheet. I'm going to set the fill. Now, the smart amongst you will have noticed that this is no longer the box in which you type text, and you'll be glad to note that in Visual Studio 2010 we'll have a color picker for you, and this will allow you to set up your colors in a much more meaningful way. But in this case, I don't really want to set a static color up. What I really want to do is set up a data-bound color, and you'll have noticed this new widget sitting to the right of the property here. If I click on that guy, I get an option to set a data binding. Okay? When I do that, this opens up our data binding picker, which is really a data binding builder. It's for building data binding statements. And you'll notice at the top here that it's already picked up the fact that I'm bound to the data context, which is actually the ambient data context for the entire grid that was created. And in this case, that turns out to be the thing I want. But later on, I'll be coming back to this for other kinds of sources. Now that I've got the right source, I just need to take a look at what's in that source and find the field that I'm looking for. You'll recall that it was the preceding field. Now, the sharp-eyed amongst you will have spotted that preceding is a Boolean. It comes up from the database, it's just a bool. And I'm trying to bind that to a color. This is not going to work out well for me. So what I need is something to help me out, and that's a converter. Okay? And converters are very much an important concept in WPF data binding, and I have some that I've written earlier. Now, you'll notice that in the list of Southbridge converters, which are the ones that are inside my project, you'll see that one of them is highlighted in bold here, and that happens to be the one that matches the pair of types that I'm trying to link up. So one side of it is ready for Boolean, the other side is ready for a brush. So I select my converter. We have a little bit of UI here which allows me to add that to the document so I can reference it later. And sure enough, what's happened now is it's written my data binding statement for me. Now, I don't know about you, but it was a whole lot easier having the tool write that for me than writing it myself. Let's see if it works. Now, I should mention that that converter just takes a bool and switches it to a green or a red brush, depending on... And there we go. There's my new rectangle. Now, you're not really close enough to see it, but just for extra effect, indulge me, because the border of that rectangle wasn't right. And like I said, I'm kind of obsessive about my UI, so I really want that border to match. Okay? Now, I could easily go ahead and bind this stroke of that border to the database field that I bound the fill to. But actually, in this case, I really want to show you another feature, which is WPF's capability to bind from element to element. So you remember I mentioned in the source I can choose other places too. And the source I'm going to choose here is a relative source. In this case, I'm going to choose self. Now what self allows me to do is to select the element that I am already within. Pay no attention. And what's going to happen now is I'm going to choose fill, and it won't dismiss. That's early builds for you. But you can see the point that I'm getting to. What I was going to build for you there was a relative source binding, and that would have created that self-binding and worked just great. And what then we would have had is a nice coherent UI that actually has the boundary looking exactly like the fill. So that's great. And what you've seen there, I'm just going to recap, is that we have a familiar RAD experience for getting started with your data-driven forms. Okay, so if you've been around Windows Forms for a while, you know the data sources window of old. It's a great way to get started. It gets me all the fields that I want, all the bindings that I want. You saw how we could repaint a control that's a better type. What I didn't show you is that in the data sources window you can also customize the type. So if you always find yourself switching to my custom type here, you can set that right up in your data sources window and have it remember that for you. So you can considerably customize that data sources window to drop the kind of UI that's most close to the kind that you generate. So generating is a way quicker way to get started, but it never takes you all the way. So what we've provided is the data binding picker, which allows you to configure pretty much the whole surface area of the data binding API in WPF without really having to understand all of it. Now that's great news because it's a huge API, right? But the picker lets you see that surface area and find the things that you're trying to work on. So that's great. That lets you get to the customized stage. Now I'm betting that those of you who've been building WPF apps are pretty addicted to your XAML by now, or at least you've kind of got to the point where you're at ease with it. And you're probably asking yourself, well, when, Mark, are you going to deliver data binding IntelliSense? And the good news is that that's coming too. Okay, so there will be data binding IntelliSense as well. So just closing down, what I hope you've seen today is that WPF is really well on its way to being a great platform for LOB developers to build, convincing real-world applications without sweating the details of data binding, syntax, and, worrying about templates and so forth, and without worrying about writing the layout code that'll make the ribbon concertina the way that you want it to, etc. The new controls are going to make you a whole lot more productive than you've been able to be up until now, we hope. You can try out those new controls today. 2,300 people, can't be wrong. They've already downloaded them, and so go ahead. You can use those in Visual Studio 2008 SP1 today, and those are the URLs you need. And I hope that finally you've seen that the next generation Visual Studio tools will help you to get much more productive in your data binding tasks, and actually there'll be a whole bunch of other convenience tools that will help you get other parts of your WPF work done. And if you want to talk some more about those afterwards, Samantha and I will actually be in the lounge area afterwards. But we've got plenty of time right now for questions, so if you could step up to the microphone with your questions. I do have to ask, there are some related sessions here. There's only one of them that's actually left. It's pretty late now. But the rest you can get on the videos afterwards, and they're all worth picking up. So please fill out your evals. We really appreciate your feedback. And do drop us email. And we're ready for your Q&A.
No problem.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we've been using the beta DataGrid for quite a while, and it's worked very well for us. One feature that we're interested in that we couldn't find is the ability to do cell merging, so that if you had two cells that are kind of grouping, it would group them together. Is there any thoughts on the future of that?
Yeah, it is.
So yeah, that's actually a really popular request that we've gotten through our CodePlex site. We do not, it won't be in V1 once it gets into the platform, but since it's so popular, I'm sure we'll be releasing a sample about that pretty soon to help you guys kind of implement it on your own.
Okay, and is there going to be some more demos? One of the things we're having a little difficulty implementing it's in there is multi-select, and sort of we do drag and drop within the grid, and we want to be able to drag and drop multiple rows, and we haven't really found a lot of demos on that or sample code or anything.
So on our CodePlex site, under the DataGrid tips and tricks, there is a sample about implementing row drag and drop. We do have built-in APIs for doing multi-select. I'm not sure how. I don't think the drag and drop of that will work. But if you want to take my card, you can feel free to email me, and I can get the team to help you implement that problem.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Hi, I've been using the DataGrids and Windows for a while now, Windows Forms, and each one of them seems to be very weak on copy and paste. And especially, I'd like to see Excel type editing in a DataGrid. You know, the little handle that you can drag in Excel. When is that going to appear in a DataGrid?
I'm not sure which handle.
Autofill. The autofill handle, where you can
exactly.
drag extended series.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that's not in V1 of this DataGrid. I'm sorry.
Well, even the third-party tools don't have that. So
really?
I mean, people would. Well, Excel does, yeah. Excel does. What I think a lot of people would like to see is Excel type editing inside I would like to see it inside my application, and I'd like to. When is that going to?
Well, I don't know. That's great feedback. That's definitely something we'll consider. I'll add it to our wiki of feature requests, and that's definitely something we'll consider adding in V2.
Right.
Thank you very much. Is somebody from the back?
Someone from
Yeah,
the back
please.
line there?
I was wondering, is there documentation for the DataGrid now on CodePlex? Because I didn't seem to be able to find that there.
Yeah,
maybe.
so there's not real official like MSDN documentation out yet. That will probably come with .NET 4.0. We do have some basic documentation up on WindowsClient.net. It's just a walkthrough of the features, pretty much the same stuff I went over today.
Oh, WindowsClient.net?
Yeah, so there are, if you go on the DataGrid release page on CodePlex, there's a little section with a bunch of links to different documents we have up about the different controls. And also, again, the DataGrid tips and tricks section has some of the popular feature requests, and we'll keep adding more to that as we hear from you guys that you need more.
Okay, also, do you know if there's any plans for the DataGrid to go into Silverlight?
Yes, there is shipping today already V1 of the Silverlight DataGrid, and it is fully API compatible with ours. So it's basically a subset of the WPF DataGrid. There's a few features that they're missing, but if you want to go ahead and write a Silverlight DataGrid, just copy and paste that into your WPF app, a few minor tweaks, and it'll work for you.
Excellent, thank you.
You're welcome.
A couple things, the row sizing. You have header width, data width, but you're missing the greater of the two, which is the reality. You don't want to cut off the header just because data is small, and you don't want the data cut off. So,
well, really we have the auto width mode will actually size to whatever the widest cell is, whether it's the header or one of the cell's content.
Unlike the grid, does that actually respect min and max?
Yes, I do believe it does.
Okay, so you can set it between them, but you can't. Okay, so you could set a max.
Yes, you can set a max and a min.
On the binding stuff, hopefully you're looking at CLR objects as the sources, not just
absolutely,
the data source.
Yes.
And can you add in or make sure, I've only played with a little bit, but notifications of focus movement within the grid, we do not want to lose focus on a row while it's invalid.
Okay. Thank you.
A couple of thoughts about data grids, and I think about normally a data grid is organized from going from top to bottom for rows and going from left to right for columns. What about some other possibilities, going right to left for columns and going bottom from to top for data rows?
So
it's some kind of flipping.
Yes, I understand.
This is the first question. Then the second question is there a possibility to flip columns into rows and rows into columns?
So the data grid is fully retemplatable. The main scenario we looked at there was actually organizing the data items into kind of like a card view. So I haven't personally looked at flipping the data grid back and forth. We don't have any built-in mechanisms there to do that probably easily, but I'm sure it's extensible.
Does your data grid has the batching capability?
I'm sorry?
Does the data grid has batching capability? Like, let's say I have thousands of records and I want to just have
V1 of the data grid does not have built-in paging, but it's definitely extensible, and it's definitely a feature we're looking into adding for our next version.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
So 2 questions. One is, do you have like a support for like a Excel kind of navigation, like a down arrow moves to the down cell, left arrow moves to the left cell, and the second one, like any formula support, like cell-based Excel kind of like formula support?
We do have support for cell navigation using your keyboard arrows. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
exactly like, so when you are in the Excel, like, and if you are in editing mode, and if you basically like press your left or right arrow keys, actually it moves to the next cell, not within the cell. And
Yeah, we do have that. And we have, I think, also most of the shortcuts you find in Excel where you can hit like Control right or left to jump to the edge of the grid, that sort of thing.
Okay. And for the formula support?
Oh, formula support. I don't think we have built-in formula support, but that should definitely be extensible. I mean, you could probably do it through your binding with a converter or something also.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Question about the ribbon. My company has been using the ribbon for quite a number of months now. One of the things we had to do was sign an agreement with Microsoft, which was about 120 pages long of requirements and things that we could and could not do. Now you're providing the ribbon native to WPF. Are those guidelines still going to apply? Do I still have to do that?
Yes. So you'll see when you actually go to download our ribbon, it's going to bring you to that same site which you had to go to sign the agreement with Office.
Oh, okay.
And you actually can't even access our ribbon download until you sign that agreement.
Okay.
And the reason for that is all the ribbon development is still being licensed under that UI. And the ribbon guidelines, I know it's a really long document and it's a lot of stuff to go through. But Office really put a lot of time and resources into doing a ton of usability testing and finding the absolute best way for your ribbon to function in order to make it easiest for users. So even though I know it seems like it could be a lot of work, we really, really highly recommend following everything in those guidelines in order to make your application the best that it can be for your end users.
Yep. And last question. Do you plan on offering Excel live filtering capabilities so that the user can filter just a number of rows without me having to code that functionality into the grid?
That's not in version 1 of the DataGrid, but it is a popular feature request. I think if you look through our CodePlex discussion forums, we've actually provided some samples about how to do that because that's been asked for before. And we'll probably go ahead and put out more of an official sample too under the tips and tricks at some point.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I noticed in your demo that you use the XAML for doing the ribbon control. What's the design experience in Cider or Blend like?
So with the preview version of Ribbon right now, there is no design experience in Cider or Blend. It will display the ribbon and update the changes live, but you can't. There's no toolbox support or anything for it right now. But in V1, we will definitely have at least the minimal design time support. Hopefully, something more.
The designers could use it to test the behavior of the collapsing and things like that without having.
Yeah,
to
that works.
out?
So if you change the size of the window while looking at the design view, the ribbon it will actually change the templates and collapse.
Great, thanks.
Hi, you showed great functionality with moving columns around and resizing and everything. Is there any built-in functionality to be able to serialize that information and then be able to save it as user settings so that when the user starts the application up again, we can easily deserialize it and then apply?
So we don't have that built in, but it's definitely extensible, and I don't think it would be too difficult to do either.
Okay, great, thanks.
In Scott Guthrie's keynote, he mentioned that in the row details view, you can customize what's there using the row details template, including putting another row in there to have a hierarchical data grid. Do you have any samples that show that kind of layout?
We don't have a sample right now, but showing hierarchical data in the data grid is one of our very top asks that we've been getting from customers. So we'll definitely putting a full sample about that out at some point in the future.
For the ribbon, we dynamically load modules into our application that we want them to extend or to add items to the ribbon dynamically. And we're running into issues with the resources having to be in the ribbon, whether you have the model nodes, so because it only loads them at startup time. Does the ribbon have the same pattern, the same limitation?
So I haven't tested that out specifically, But one thing that I do know is that in one of the guidelines it mentions that controls shouldn't be added to the ribbon, added and removed ribbon dynamically, and instead they should either, unless they're within a contextual tab. Otherwise, they said a better usability would be for the controls to always be there and be either disabled or enabled depending on the context. So that was the scenario that we were mainly targeting when we built the ribbon. So I'm not sure if that particular scenario will work, but if you'd like to follow up with me offline, we can definitely check with the team and find out if that'll work for you.
Thank you.
You talked all about doing row validation. Is there any plans on full page or column validation as well? Since we have data that's where the rows are actually related to each other.
Okay.
And when we do a change in the row, it affects the other rows.
All right, so we haven't tried out that scenario in particular, but it's probably would be possible using the binding groups feature. It's probably a little difficult to implement, but we could definitely help you out with that.
Okay. On the just a tiny little thing, you have the alternating row color. Mm-hmm. Is there any way you can set up that to be changing color every 3 rows or every 2 rows? Yes, you can do that, huh?
The alternating rows is using a new feature from 3.5 SP1 called alternation count and alternation index. And that basically allows you to alternate as many different row colors as you want. So I think the built-in feature just has the alternating the 2 rows, and because that's the simplest and the most common case. But you could roll your own. You could use alternation index and alternation count to do this on DataGrid since it's an items control.
Yeah, so it does, for example, to have a change color every 3 rows,
yes,
for example.
Definitely.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, and there's samples for binding groups, I think up on MSDN, which show how to do this, and you just apply that same thing to DataGrid. It should work.
Thank you.
Hi. Had a quick question. One of the scenarios we have is, and we currently use Windows Forms, is if we have a certain cell, and let's say the value of that, based on that value, I need the whole row to be, the text on the row to be colored as green or red. But that's more runtime. I mean, there's no data source at the back. It's more like a runtime thing. Would we be able to do something like that more easily? Because I know in Windows Forms, it's a big pain to do something like that.
Yeah, I think you should be able to do that pretty easily, either using a trigger or possibly our new Visual State Manager feature.
Okay.
Actually, I wanted to mention also to everyone, there is a hands-on lab available in the hands-on lab area in the big room, which uses DataGrid, Ribbon, Date Picker, and Visual State Manager, all the new controls we just released this week. So if you want to go ahead and try some of that stuff out, you guys are more welcome to go down there. We'll be in the lab or in the lounge right next door, so if you need any help, just stop by the WPF team and we'll be able to come by and show you how to do some stuff. Sure. Oh, really? I don't know. It's fixed? Okay, apparently it's fixed.
It's also going to be available on windowsclient.net, so you email to yourself and the lab section, the lab manual, or you can go to windowsclient.net/WPF or get it right.
Yeah, and the version of the lab, which is on windowsclient.net, is also linked to from the CodePlex site where you can go to download DataGrid.
And you do need the Visual Studio SP1 to try these controls?
No, it works in 2008, I believe, or 2005, any of the older versions.
Does. Okay.
It's not dependent on any.
Oh, thanks.
But you'll want to use 2008 SP1 for stability.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. No, we have
the tools guy has to have his say sometime.
No, we have the 2008, but for some reason we are not able to install the SP1. It might be something local.
I'd like to sync up with you offline about that, actually, if you want to have a chat.
Okay. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there any grouping support in the DataGrid, just like all other items controls?
So the DataGrid, we don't have any grouping APIs in there built in, but again, this is a really common feature, and I think whatever we have in the other items controls should be inherited, and that should work. I'm not positive though. I want to follow up with you about that offline and make sure I can get you the right information.
Okay.
So, any more questions out there?
All right, if you guys, you're more than welcome to come chat with us afterwards. We'll be heading down to the lounge in a couple of minutes also.
So in the WPF area in the lounge if you want to chat some more. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.